She called me jealous for feeding her starving daughter and said I was just a sad woman who couldn't handle being powerless. When I asked her why she was doing this, she rolled her eyes and said, because she makes money when she's hungry. What do you make? I just stared at her. That was 3 months ago. Yesterday, she locked herself in the courtroom bathroom and cried so quietly I almost missed it. I was 9 when my parents first punished me with forced starvation. I was already borderline anorexic, and that week I spent without food sent my body into shock that hospitalized me with brain damage. I came out of it barely alive, needing assistance tools to communicate and a lot less hyperactive than I was. My parents noticed how much easier their life was when I was basically a vegetable, and decided that going forward if I ever started recovering and becoming too much again, they'd just starve me. Just like that, my childhood became a cycle of turning my brain to mush over and over. I ended up running away at 15, and I never looked back. Fast forward to last year. I was 39, and somehow got my brain to a point where I'd attended and even graduated college. I became a teacher at an elementary school, striving to be the safe space kids need but sometimes don't have at home. That brings us to Sophie. Sophie was a girl in my first ever 4th grade class from a put-together and affluent family, but there was something about her. From the day I met her, her cheeks were sunken, her eyes looked tired, and her mouth watered when food was mentioned. The signs became impossible to ignore on day 1. During lunchtime, she chewed on her erasers. She bit her nails and ate her cuticles. I remember voicing my concerns to the principal, but he assured me that Sophie was in good hands and told me not to ask questions. Of course, I didn't believe it. I started paying more attention, noticing how Sophie's mother picked her up early twice a week for what she called portfolio shoots. Within 2 weeks of the school year starting, she had become the class bullying target. Kids started calling her skeleton and bony. They'd dangle food above her head, then snatch it away when she reached for it. The worst part was when I contacted these kids' parents. The principal would get involved, telling me it's not up to me to discipline them. I was in shock. I still tried telling myself that maybe Sophie was just naturally thin or something, but that all came crashing down one Monday. Sophie arrived at school shaking so badly she could barely hold a pencil. I caught her drinking from the unfiltered bathroom tap like she hadn't had water in days. She traded her designer shoes for crackers during lunch. Later, I found her in the bathroom literally eating tissues. I remember offering her some of my lunch that day, and her eyes lit up. She looked almost apprehensive to take it. Genuinely bewildered I didn't hit her after she took a second bite. I tried to ask her about her home life, but she refused to say a thing until the next day. She came in limping, looking like she had been hurt. I found her in the bathroom, but this time she started opening up. She mentioned something about how she ruined a shoot by looking bloated. She wouldn't say more, but that was enough for the pieces to start connecting. From that day on, I started a secret breakfast club before school free of charge where I supplied all the food myself. Only Sophie showed up after telling her parents she was coming in early to study. She always ate everything I brought. For 3 weeks, I fed her and watched her gain energy. Even the bullying decreased as her cheeks filled out. Unfortunately, that was my mistake. The food made her face look healthier. I remember one day after school, her mother stormed into my classroom screaming at me. She didn't even introduce herself, just started yelling about how she knew what I was doing. She bansheed that Sophie had lost a $5,000 booking because of me. She accused me of sabotaging Sophie's career and asked me how it feels knowing I was costing an honest family a living. I stared at her in disbelief. Here this woman was, proudly alluding to the fact she starves her child. I remember telling her that damn right I fed Sophie, and that I was going to keep feeding her. And unless she does too, then I will make one phone call and we can see what CPS thinks of the way their honest family makes a living. I remember her face went pale, but then it turned dark. She got this look like she had just pulled a trump card and said that if I interfere with her parenting again, she'll have me arrested so quickly I won't even get to make the CPS report. It was a clear threat. And because her family made considerable donations to the school and were pretty notorious good guys in our small town, her words held weight. Unfortunately for her, I had been in Sophie's shoes once, and I was willing to walk on hot coals to make sure this little girl got to eat. But I knew that to do that, I'd have to sadly be the bad guy for a little while. And so, I was. I stopped the food programs and started acting professionally distant. Sophie started losing weight again, and I could see it broke her little heart, but I'd always whisper to her that I was here for her, and I need her to hold out just a little longer. Because while on the surface I had given up, I was secretly documenting everything, every behavior, every modeling pickup. I took her testimonies during recess, which she so bravely agreed to give. She even revealed that her little sister was 5 and her parents had already started starving her to prepare her for the future. But then, just as we were on the verge of having enough proof, Sophie disappeared for a week. Her mother claimed she was doing something exclusive in Miami, but when Sophie returned, she looked skeletal again. Her hair was falling out. She could barely speak. And it's during lunch that the worst happened. She spotted unattended cupcakes on a classmate's desk. Desperation took over. She grabbed all of them and shoved them in her mouth. Doesn't sound so bad until you realize that such an intake of sugar and carbohydrates can literally cull a person who is just starved. Don't believe me? Look it up. Within minutes, Sophie's eyes rolled back, her body convulsed, and she collapsed with foam coming out of her mouth. The paramedics rushed in while I stood frozen, watching them work on Sophie's tiny body. Her mother arrived within minutes, screaming accusations at me for letting her daughter eat the cupcakes. The principal pulled me aside and told me to go home for the day while they sorted things out. I spent that afternoon pacing my apartment, checking my phone every few minutes for updates. The hospital wouldn't tell me anything since I wasn't family. All I could do was wait and pray that Sophie would pull through. The next morning, I arrived at school to find a formal reprimand on my desk. The principal stood in my doorway, arms crossed. He informed me that Sophie's mother had filed a complaint, claiming I had negligently supervised the classroom and allowed her daughter access to dangerous foods. He said the school board was considering suspension pending investigation. I wanted to scream. I wanted to show him all the documentation I'd gathered, but I knew that would only make things worse right now. Sophie needed me to play this smart, so I nodded, accepted the reprimand, and asked about Sophie's condition. He said she was stable but would be out for at least 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks felt like months. I continued teaching, but my heart wasn't in it. Every empty desk reminded me of Sophie. The other kids whispered about what happened, some saying Sophie was greedy, others wondering why she'd eaten so desperately. I couldn't correct them without revealing too much. During this time, I noticed something else. Sophie's little sister started showing up at school with their mother. She'd wait in the office during pickup times, and I could see her through the window. 5 years old, with the same sunken cheeks Sophie had when I first met her, the same tired eyes, the same way of staring longingly at the vending machines. I started documenting her too, taking photos when I could without being obvious. The principal principal caught me once and warned me to mind my own business. He reminded me that I was already on thin ice. Sophie finally returned on a Thursday morning. She moved slowly, carefully, like her body might break. Her mother walked her to class personally, shooting me a triumphant look. Sophie wouldn't meet my eyes. She sat at her desk and stared at her hands. At recess, I tried to approach her, but she walked away. During lunch, she ate a small container of plain rice her mother had packed. Nothing else. The other kids avoided her now, unsure how to act around someone who'd collapsed so dramatically. I gave her space for a few days, but it called me to watch her suffer in silence. Then, on Monday, I found a note in my desk drawer. Sophie's shaky handwriting. Meet me in the library during lunch, please. I found her hidden between the shelves, tears streaming down her face. She whispered that her mother had threatened to pull her out of school if she talked to me again, but she was scared. Her sister had started this special diet and was already showing signs of weakness. I held her while she cried, promising I'd figure something out. But her mother had gotten smarter. She started volunteering at school, always watching. She joined the PTA and made generous donations. She became friends with other influential parents. Everyone loved her dedication to the school community. Meanwhile, I noticed other things. Sophie's grades dropping because she couldn't concentrate, her hands shaking during tests, her hair continuing to fall out in clumps that she'd try to hide in her desk. I tried reaching out to other teachers, but they'd been warned to stay out of it. One quietly told me that Sophie's mother had threatened legal action against anyone who interfered with her parenting. The principal had made it clear that supporting me meant risking their jobs, so I changed tactics. I started leaving small portions of food in places Sophie could find them. A granola bar in the library where she hid, a juice box in the bathroom, never enough to make her sick again, just enough to help. Sophie's mom turning school donations into a shield for child abuse is some next-level villain behavior. She's basically buying a hall pass to starve her kids while everyone pretends not to notice the walking skeleton in 4th grade. She never acknowledged it, but the food always disappeared. Her mother must have suspected something because she started picking Sophie up for lunch, bringing her back just before afternoon classes. Sophie would return looking defeated, sometimes with red marks on her arms that she'd pull her sleeves down to hide. The modeling appointments increased. Sometimes Sophie missed entire days for shoots. When she returned, she looked worse each time. Her mother would parade her around, talking about Sophie's successful career, how she was going to be famous. I documented everything, every absence, every visible sign of abuse, every interaction I witnessed. I filled notebooks with observations, took photos when possible, recorded dates and times. But I needed more. I needed Sophie's voice. One day, Sophie's mother was late for pickup. Sophie waited in my classroom, and I seized the opportunity. I asked if she wanted to talk, promising I wouldn't let anyone hurt her. She was terrified but desperate. She told me about the water restrictions, the exercise requirements, the punishments for gaining even an ounce, the way her mother would pinch her skin and call her disgusting. She told me her sister had already been booked for her first shoot, 5 years old and already being groomed for starvation. Sophie cried, saying she didn't want her sister to suffer like she had. I recorded everything on my phone, hidden in my desk drawer. Sophie was so brave, speaking clearly despite her fear. She even showed me the bruises on her arms, the ones her mother left when she caught Sophie sneaking water. We were interrupted by footsteps in the hallway. Sophie's mother appeared, face twisted with rage. She'd been looking everywhere for Sophie. She grabbed her daughter's arm roughly, yanking her from the chair. Sophie winced but didn't cry out. Her mother turned to me, eyes cold. She said she knew what I was trying to do, that I was jealous of Sophie's success, of their family's prosperity. She threatened to destroy my career, to ensure I never taught again. Then she dragged Sophie out, leaving me shaking with anger. That night, I made copies of everything. The recordings, the photos, the documentation. I hid them in multiple places, knowing Sophie's mother had connections. I couldn't risk losing the evidence. The next day, Sophie wasn't at school, or the day after. Her mother called in, claiming Sophie had booked a major campaign and would be out for a week. I knew better. I'd seen the fear in Sophie's eyes, the desperation. I tried driving by their house, but it was in a gated community. Security turned me away. I called the school, but the principal told me to stop obsessing over one student. He reminded me about my reprimand, the thin ice. By Friday, I was desperate. Sophie had been gone all week. Her desk sat empty, a constant reminder of my failure to protect her. I'd gathered all this evidence, but what good was it if I couldn't help her? Then, during my lunch break, I saw her, Sophie's little sister, in the office with their mother. The 5-year-old was crying, holding her stomach. Their mother looked annoyed, telling her to stop being dramatic. The secretary offered the child crackers, but their mother snatched them away, saying she had allergies. I watched through the window as the little girl swayed on her feet. Her mother grabbed her arm, steadying her roughly. They left quickly, but I'd seen enough. The cycle was continuing, and I couldn't let it happen. That afternoon, I made a decision. I couldn't wait any longer. Sophie needed help now. Her sister needed help now. The system had failed them, but I wouldn't. I spent the weekend planning. I knew Sophie's mother had made me the villain in her story, the jealous teacher trying to sabotage a successful child model. But I also knew the truth had power. I just needed to be smart about how I used it. Monday morning arrived with unexpected news. Sophie was back in school, but she looked terrible, worse than ever. She could barely walk, leaning on desks for support. Her mother had dressed her in long sleeves and tights despite the warm weather, hiding who knows what underneath. During morning work time, Sophie collapsed again. Not dramatically like before, just a quiet slump forward onto her desk. I rushed to her, feeling her forehead. She was burning up. The other students gasped, some starting to cry. I called the nurse, who called an ambulance. Sophie's mother arrived as they were loading her daughter onto a stretcher. She tried to refuse transport, claiming Sophie was fine, just tired from working. The paramedics ignored her, citing protocol. As they left, Sophie's mother turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. She hissed that this was my fault, that I'd ruined everything, that she'd make sure I paid for this. The principal called me to his office that afternoon. Sophie's mother had been there, demanding my immediate termination. She'd accused me of harassment, of stalking her family, of deliberately making Sophie sick to prove some twisted point. The principal said the school board was meeting tomorrow to discuss my future. I went home knowing my time was running out. Sophie was in the hospital, but for how long? Her mother would find a way to get her out, to continue the abuse, and her little sister was still at home, still being starved. That night, I made more copies of my evidence. I organized everything chronologically, creating a clear timeline of abuse. I transcribed Sophie's recorded testimony word for word. I prepared for what I knew was coming. The next morning, I arrived early. The school was quiet, peaceful. I sat in my empty classroom, looking at Sophie's desk, remembering the bright-eyed girl who'd arrived on the first day of school. Despite everything, I didn't regret trying to help her. I just wished I could have done more. The school board meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. I spent the morning teaching, trying to maintain normalcy for my students while my mind raced through possibilities. Sophie's mother had arrived early. I could see her through my classroom window, shaking hands with board members in the parking lot. She wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase, looking every bit the successful businesswoman she portrayed herself to be. During my prep period, the school counselor knocked on my door. She entered quietly, closing it behind her. Her face showed concern as she explained that Sophie's mother had submitted a thick file of complaints against me. The woman had documented every interaction, twisted every attempt to help into something sinister. She'd even hired a private investigator who'd photographed me driving past their gated community. The counselor warned me that the board seemed inclined to side with Sophie's mother. The family's donations to the school were substantial, funding the new computer lab and sports equipment. She advised me to consider resigning quietly to avoid a messy termination that would end my teaching career. I thanked her for the warning but refused to give up. Sophie was still in the hospital, and her little sister was suffering at home. Walking away meant abandoning them both. That afternoon, I entered the board meeting room to find it packed. Sophie's mother sat at the front table with her lawyer, a stack of documents before them. Parents filled the chairs, many I recognized as her new PTA friends. The principal avoided my eyes as I took my seat. The board president called the meeting to order. Sophie's mother stood, presenting her case with practiced precision. She painted me as an obsessed teacher who'd fixated on her daughter, interfering with parenting decisions and stalking their family. She showed photos of me near their community, emphasized how I'd secretly fed Sophie against explicit instructions, and claimed I'd traumatized her daughter by allowing the cupcake incident. Her lawyer presented witness statements from other parents, all expressing concern about my behavior. They'd twisted everything. My breakfast club became an attempt to lure children. My documentation of abuse became an unhealthy obsession. Even my own history of childhood starvation was used against me, suggesting I was projecting my trauma onto an innocent family. When my turn came to respond, I stood on shaking legs. I tried explaining the signs of starvation I'd observed, Sophie's desperate behaviors, the modeling schedule that coincided with her weight loss. But without my evidence, which I couldn't reveal yet, my words sounded exactly like what they'd accused me of, an obsessed teacher making wild accusations against a prominent family. The board members exchanged glances. One asked if I had any proof of these serious allegations. I hesitated, knowing that revealing my documentation now would give Sophie's mother time to counter it, possibly even destroy evidence or coach Sophie before any investigation. I remained silent. The board voted to suspend me immediately pending further investigation. Security escorted me from the building as Sophie's mother smiled triumphantly. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by my evidence, photos of Sophie's deteriorating condition, recordings of her describing the abuse, documentation of every incident. But what good was it if I couldn't use it? The system that should protect children was failing Sophie because her mother had money and influence. My phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A small voice whispered urgently. It was Sophie, calling from the hospital. She'd borrowed a nurse's phone while her mother stepped out. She was being discharged tomorrow, and her mother had already scheduled a 2-week shoot in another state. Sophie begged me not to give up, saying her sister had fainted that morning, but their mother just gave her water and sent her to her room. The call ended abruptly. Sophie's mother must have returned, but it was enough. Sophie calling from the hospital feels carefully timed. She somehow gets a nurse's phone right when her mother steps out. The mother's systematic campaign against the teacher shows someone who knows exactly how to work the system, using donations and connections to flip the. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I couldn't go to school, but nothing stopped me from being a concerned citizen. I parked across from the hospital, watching for Sophie's discharge. Around noon, I saw them exit. Sophie could barely walk, her mother practically dragging her to their car. They drove not home, but to a medical building nearby. I followed at a distance, parking where I could see the entrance. They emerged an hour later, Sophie looking even worse. Her mother carried a bag from a pharmacy. They drove to several more locations, a modeling agency, a photographer's studio, even a gym where Sophie's mother made her daughter walk on a treadmill while she talked on her phone. By evening, Sophie could no longer stand. Her mother had to carry her into another building, this one unmarked. They stayed for 2 hours. When they emerged, Sophie was unconscious in her mother's arms. I called 911, reporting a child in medical distress, but by the time the ambulance arrived at the location I'd given, they were gone. The dispatcher said without a specific address or license plate, they couldn't do anything. Frustrated, I drove toward their gated community, knowing I'd be turned away but needing to do something. As I approached, I saw their car pulled over on the side of the road just outside the gates. Sophie's mother stood by the driver's door, on her phone, gesturing angrily. Through the back window, I could see Sophie slumped in her seat. I pulled over a safe distance away, watching. Sophie's mother ended her call and got back in the car, but it wouldn't start. She tried several times, then got out again, slamming the door. She paced, making another call, probably for roadside assistance. This was my chance. While she was distracted, I approached the car from the opposite side. Sophie was barely conscious, her breathing shallow. I tapped on the window. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with difficulty. I mouthed that help was coming, that she needed to be strong a little longer. She managed the weakest smile before her eyes closed again. Her mother's voice grew closer, so I retreated to my car. The tow truck arrived within minutes. Sophie's mother had them tow the car into the community, while she and Sophie rode in the truck's cab. I couldn't follow past the gates, but I'd seen enough. Sophie's condition was critical. That night, I made a difficult decision. The system had failed, but I had one more option. I spent hours preparing a package with all my evidence. Photos, recordings, documentation, everything organized chronologically with detailed explanations. I made multiple copies. The next morning, instead of going to the school board or CPS, I went somewhere else. The local news station had an investigative reporter known for exposing corruption and child welfare issues. But as I sat in the parking lot, I hesitated. This would make everything public, potentially traumatizing Sophie further. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It was a photo of Sophie's little sister at what looked like a photo shoot, wearing a bathing suit, her ribs clearly visible. The message read, "She's replacing Sophie. Stop interfering or they both disappear." My hands shook as I stared at the photo. The threat was clear. Sophie's mother knew I was still watching, still trying to help. And now she was using both daughters as leverage. I needed help, real help. But from whom? The school had turned against me. The authorities required proof I couldn't provide without endangering the girls. The media would create a circus that might drive the family underground. Then I remembered something. During my research into Sophie's mother, I discovered discovered she had a sister who lived across town. They'd been estranged for years, something about a family business dispute. Maybe she would listen. I found the sister's address and drove there that afternoon. The house was modest, nothing like the mansion Sophie lived in. A woman answered the door who looked like an older, kinder version of Sophie's mother. When I explained who I was and why I was there, her face went pale. She invited me in, her hands trembling as she poured coffee. She told me she'd suspected something was wrong, but hadn't seen her nieces in years. Her sister had cut her off after she'd questioned putting Sophie into modeling so young. I showed her some of the photos, played a portion of Sophie's testimony. She cried, saying she'd tried to stay involved, but her sister had threatened legal action if she came near the children. She'd been watching from afar, hoping things would improve. Together, we formed a plan. She still had legal rights as family that I didn't. She could request wellness checks, demand to see her nieces, and with my evidence to support her concerns, authorities would have to listen. But Sophie's mother must have anticipated this. The next day, when the sister tried to visit, security at the gated community had her name on a ban list. When she called CPS for a wellness check, she was told the family was traveling for work and would be investigated upon return. We learned from a neighbor that Sophie's mother had pulled both girls from school, claiming she was homeschooling them for their careers. The house looked empty most days, curtains drawn, no signs of life. Days passed with no word. I'd been banned from school property, my suspension turning into termination proceedings. Sophie's desk had been cleared out, her name removed from the class roster. It was like she'd never existed. Then, late one night, my phone rang. The sister's number. She was crying, barely coherent. She'd just gotten a call from a hospital 2 states away. Sophie had been admitted in critical condition. Her mother had claimed she'd developed an eating disorder, refusing food despite encouragement. We drove through the night, taking turns at the wheel. The evidence package sat between us, our only hope of saving Sophie and her sister. We didn't know what we'd find at the hospital, but we knew this might be our last chance. The hospital was small, in a town I'd never heard of. We found Sophie in the pediatric ward, hooked to multiple machines. She looked skeletal, worse than I'd ever seen her. Her mother sat beside the bed, playing the part of the concerned parent for the medical staff. When she saw us, her face contorted with rage. She stood, blocking our view of Sophie, demanding to know how we'd found them. The sister stepped forward, announcing herself as family, demanding to see her niece. The nurses looked confused, caught between family drama and protocol. Sophie's mother tried to have us removed, but the sister held her ground. She told the nurses she had concerns about her niece's care, that she suspected medical neglect. The head nurse, sensing something serious, called for the attending physician. While Sophie's mother argued with her sister, I slipped closer to Sophie's bed. Her eyes were open, watching the chaos with exhausted resignation. I touched her hand gently, and she squeezed back weakly. The doctor arrived, trying to mediate. Sophie's mother spun her story about a troubled child with an eating disorder, a dedicated mother trying everything to help. She painted her sister as estranged and bitter, and me as the suspended teacher who developed an unhealthy fixation. But then Sophie spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the sudden silence, everyone heard her. She said she was hungry, that she'd been hungry for so long, that her mother wouldn't let her eat because of the pictures. The room froze. The doctor's expression changed, becoming serious. He asked Sophie to repeat what she'd said. With tremendous effort, Sophie told them about the modeling, the diets, the punishments for gaining weight. She mentioned her little sister, begging someone to check on her. Sophie's mother tried to interrupt, claiming Sophie was confused, delirious from her condition. But the medical staff had heard enough. The doctor ordered immediate tests and called for a social worker. The sister produced a flash drive with my evidence, photos spanning months, showing Sophie's deterioration, the recorded testimony where Sophie detailed the abuse, documentation of the modeling schedules that corresponded with her weight loss. Security arrived to escort Sophie's mother out while the investigation began. She screamed threats at both of us, promising lawsuits, destruction of our lives, but her power had evaporated the moment Sophie spoke up. The social worker reviewed our evidence while doctors worked to stabilize Sophie. She made calls, setting the official wheels in motion. Within hours, police were sent to check on Sophie's sister at their home. They found her locked in her room, so weak she couldn't stand. She was rushed to the same hospital, where doctors discovered she was severely malnourished and dehydrated. The modeling photos on her mother's phone showed a clear timeline of her deterioration. I stayed at the hospital while the sister dealt with the legal aspects. Sophie improved slowly, requiring careful refeeding to avoid complications. Her sister was in worse condition, having been subjected to the starvation methods from an even younger age. The investigation revealed the extent of the abuse. Sophie's mother had been drugging both girls with appetite suppressants. She'd locked them in their rooms without food for days before shoots. The money from modeling had become an addiction, each booking requiring the girls to be thinner than before. Other models came forward, young girls who'd worked with the same photographers, a network of parents pushing their children to dangerous extremes for money. Sophie's testimony had opened a door that couldn't be closed, but my focus remained on Sophie and her sister. I visited every day, bringing small gifts, reading stories, just being present. Sophie's recovery was slow, both physically and emotionally. She'd been taught that food was the enemy, that her worth was tied to her appearance. Teaching finally paid off. The narrator just gave a masterclass in tracking someone without technically stalking them. Though Sophie's mom dragging her half-dead daughter to a photo shoot really makes you wonder who needs the education here. Her sister struggled more, having known nothing else. At 5 years old, she didn't understand why she was suddenly allowed to eat. She would hide food, terrified it would be taken away. The therapist said it would take years to undo the damage. The sister gained temporary custody while the legal process played out. She moved the girls into her modest home, transforming it into a haven of regular meals and unconditional love. I helped when I could, tutoring Sophie to catch up on missed schoolwork. The school board, faced with the evidence and public scrutiny, quietly dropped all actions against me. The principal resigned, his complicity in ignoring the abuse too damaging to overlook. Parents who'd supported Sophie's mother distanced themselves, claiming they'd never suspected anything wrong. But I didn't care about vindication. Watching Sophie slowly regain weight, seeing color return to her cheeks, hearing her laugh for the first time, that was all that mattered. Her sister began to play like a normal child, discovering toys and games instead of scales and cameras. The legal proceedings moved forward, but I stayed focused on the girls' recovery. Sophie's mother faced criminal charges, her modeling empire crumbling as more victims came forward. The photographers and agencies involved faced their own investigations. Through it all, Sophie showed remarkable strength. She testified when needed, faced her mother in supervised visits, and slowly learned to trust again. She started eating regular meals, girls, though some days were harder than others. The therapy sessions were intense, uncovering layers of psychological abuse beyond the starvation. Her sister's recovery was different but equally challenging. She had no memories of normal life to return to. Every meal was a new experience. Every pound gained a victory against the only life she'd known. The therapist worked carefully, rebuilding her relationship with food from scratch. I returned to teaching at a different school. My reputation complicated, but my resolve stronger. I kept in close contact with Sophie and her sister, watching their progress with mixed emotions. The trauma they'd endured would leave lasting scars, but they were surviving. Sophie's aunt proved to be everything the girls needed: patient, loving, and fiercely protective. She attended every therapy session, every medical appointment, every legal hearing. She sold her car to pay for specialized treatment, never complaining about the sacrifice. The community rallied around them once the truth came out. Donations poured in for medical expenses. Local restaurants delivered meals. Teachers offered free tutoring. The same town that had believed Sophie's mother's lies now worked to repair the damage. But healing isn't linear. Sophie had setbacks, days when eating felt impossible. Her sister would sometimes refuse food, reverting to learned behaviors. The aunt would call me during the worst moments, both of us trying to figure out how to help. The investigation uncovered more than just the starvation. Financial records showed Sophie's mother had spent most of the modeling money on herself: designer clothes, expensive cars, cosmetic procedures. The girls had been tools for her lifestyle, nothing more. Other families in the modeling world watched nervously as the scandal unfolded. Some pulled their children out immediately. Others doubled down, claiming their situations were different. The industry faced scrutiny it had avoided for years. Sophie started writing in a journal, processing her experiences through words. She showed me some entries, heartbreaking accounts of hunger so intense she'd dreamed of food. She wrote about the photo shoots, standing for hours while adults criticized her body. She wrote about her sister, the guilt of watching her suffer the same fate. The little sister's progress was measured in tiny victories. The first time she asked for seconds at dinner, the day she chose a doll over practicing poses, when she finally stopped checking her reflection for signs of weight gain. Winter arrived with a custody hearing. Sophie's mother, out on bail, fought for her parental rights. She'd hired new lawyers, presented herself as a reformed parent who'd made mistakes. She claimed the modeling had been for the girls' futures, that she'd never intended harm. The courtroom was packed. Other parents from the modeling scandal, social workers, medical professionals. Sophie, now 13, was deemed old enough to testify. Her sister, at 6, would be represented by a child advocate. I sat in the gallery, watching Sophie take the stand. She'd gained weight, looking healthier but still fragile. Her voice shook as she described the hunger, the punishments, the fear. She talked about finding her sister crying from stomach pains, begging for just one cracker. Her mother's lawyers tried to paint her as a confused child, influenced by others. They suggested the eating issues were self-imposed, that Sophie had developed an eating disorder independent of the modeling. They pointed to the family's wealth as evidence of good care. But Sophie held firm. She detailed specific incidents, dates when she'd been locked in her room without food. She described the appetite suppressants hidden in her vitamins. She talked about the contracts her mother signed, promising certain weights for certain jobs. The medical evidence was overwhelming. Both girls showed signs of long-term starvation. Bone density scans revealed damage consistent with chronic malnutrition. Growth charts showed dramatic drops coinciding with modeling schedules. The judge's decision was swift: permanent custody to the aunt, supervised visits only if the girls requested them. Sophie's mother lost all parental rights, pending criminal trial outcomes. The courtroom erupted in quiet relief. Outside, Sophie hugged her aunt, then me. She whispered that she felt free for the first time. Her sister, not fully understanding but sensing the importance, joined the embrace. We stood there in the cold, a makeshift family forged through trauma and triumph. The criminal trial would come later, but for now, the girls were safe. They had a long road ahead, years of therapy, medical monitoring, learning to trust, but they had each other, their aunt, and a community that had finally stepped up. I returned to my classroom with renewed purpose. Every child who walked through my door would be seen, really seen. The signs I'd learned to recognize in Sophie would help me protect others. Her bravery had changed not just her own life, but potentially countless others. The modeling industry faced new regulations, though enforcement remained a challenge. Parents had to provide medical clearances, proof of proper nutrition, limited working hours. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress sparked by one brave girl's testimony. Sophie returned to school the following fall, not to my class, but to the same building. She walked the halls with her head high, no longer hiding behind designer clothes. Her grades improved steadily, her natural intelligence finally fueled by proper nutrition. Her sister started first grade, a normal child experiencing school for the first time. She made friends, played at recess, ate lunch without fear. The teachers knew her history, watching carefully but letting her be a child. The aunt juggled work and guardianship with grace. She learned to cook nutritious meals that didn't trigger the girls' anxieties. She attended every school event, every therapy appointment. She created the stable home they'd never had. I visited regularly, helping with homework, sharing meals, just being present. Sophie would sometimes talk about the past, processing memories as she grew older. Other times, she just wanted to be a normal teenager, complaining about math tests and discussing books. The little sister's memories faded as new experiences replaced them. She still had food anxieties, but they decreased with time and therapy. She discovered art, spending hours drawing and painting, expressing emotions she couldn't yet verbalize. One evening, while helping Sophie with a school project, she asked me why I'd fought so hard for her. I told her about my own childhood, the starvation, the brain damage, the recovery. I explained how seeing her had brought back memories I'd buried, but also given me purpose. She listened quietly, then hugged me. She said I'd saved her life, but I corrected her. She'd saved her own life by being brave enough to speak up. I just refused to look away. The project she was working on was about heroes. She'd chosen to write about her aunt, the woman who'd stepped up when the system failed. But in her conclusion, she wrote about everyday heroes, teachers who notice, neighbors who care, anyone who refuses to ignore a child in need. As spring arrived, both girls bloomed. Sophie joined the track team, running for joy rather than punishment. Her sister took dance classes, moving for fun instead of photos. Their laughter filled the aunt's small house, a sound more beautiful than any modeling contract. The criminal trial concluded with Sophie's mother convicted on multiple charges. She received a prison sentence that would keep her away for years. Other parents and industry professionals faced their own consequences. The modeling agency closed, its reputation destroyed. But in that small house across town, none of that mattered anymore. What mattered were family dinners where everyone ate freely. daily, bedtime stories without weight checks, school days filled with learning instead of hunger, the simple, profound joy of children being allowed to be children. Sophie graduated middle school with honors, her speech touching on resilience and the power of speaking truth. Her sister cheered loudly from the audience, understanding now what her big sister had done for them both. The aunt cried happy tears, proud of how far they'd come. I continued teaching, carrying Sophie's story with me. The aunt selling her car to pay for treatment makes me wonder about the real financial situation here. How does someone with a modest home suddenly afford specialized therapy for two severely traumatized children without any mention of insurance or support systems? Every September brought new students, new chances to spot the signs others might miss. The breakfast club I'd started for Sophie became an official program, feeding any child who needed it, no questions asked. The girls' recovery wasn't complete, might never be entirely, but they were living, truly living, for the first time. Each meal eaten without fear, each pound gained without panic, each laugh shared freely was a victory over their past. And in my classroom, Sophie's empty desk had been filled by another student, but her impact remained. A reminder that one person noticing, one teacher refusing to give up, one child brave enough to speak could change everything. The cycle had been broken, the pattern interrupted. Two little girls were free, and that made every difficult moment worth it. I watched from my car as Sophie's mother emerged from the hospital's administrative wing, her phone pressed to her ear. She gestured wildly, pacing the sidewalk while Sophie remained alone in that sterile room. The sister and I had agreed to take shifts monitoring the situation, and my turn had just begun. The next 3 days blurred together. Sophie's condition stabilized slowly while her mother maintained her performance for the medical staff. I documented every interaction through the window, noting how she'd position herself perfectly whenever nurses entered, then immediately returned to her phone once they left. On the fourth morning, something changed. Sophie's mother arrived with two men in suits. Through careful observation, I recognized one as the photographer from the modeling agency. They huddled near Sophie's bed, papers spread across the rolling table meant for meals. I texted the sister immediately. She arrived within 20 minutes, marching straight past security with the confidence only family could muster. The confrontation that followed drew several nurses, though I could only watch the animated gestures and increasingly red faces through the glass. Hospital security eventually separated them, but not before the sister had grabbed several of the papers. She found me in the parking lot afterward, shaking with anger. The documents were contracts for future shoots, scheduled to begin the moment Sophie left the hospital. Her mother was already planning the next campaign, calculating how Sophie's current emaciated state could be marketed as high fashion. We spent that afternoon strategizing. The sister contacted every family member she could think of, even distant cousins who might have influence. Most refused to get involved, but Sophie's grandmother, estranged for over a decade, agreed to fly in from across the country. The grandmother arrived the next morning, a formidable woman who walked with a cane but radiated authority. She hadn't seen her granddaughters in years, her daughter having cut contact after early disagreements about the modeling. Her arrival at the hospital caused immediate tension. Sophie's mother tried to have her mother removed, but the grandmother held her ground. She demanded to see both granddaughters, threatening to involve authorities if denied. The standoff lasted hours, with hospital administrators caught in the middle. During the chaos, I noticed Sophie watching everything from her bed. Her eyes tracked each person, absorbing the family drama playing out before her. When her grandmother finally gained access to the room, Sophie reached out weakly, tears streaming down her face. The reunion was brief but powerful. The grandmother examined Sophie's condition with growing horror, her weathered hands gentle as she touched her granddaughter's protruding bones. She turned to her daughter with an expression that could have melted steel. What followed was a family reckoning years in the making. The grandmother revealed she'd been documenting her concerns from afar, hiring someone to photograph the girls at public events. She had a timeline showing their progressive weight loss, corresponding with their modeling schedules. Sophie's mother tried to maintain her facade, but cracks appeared. She accused her mother of jealousy, of trying to destroy her daughter's careers. The grandmother simply produced more evidence, including emails from concerned extended family members dating back years. The hospital social worker, who'd been monitoring the situation, called for a formal meeting. All parties were required to attend, including me as the reporting teacher. The small conference room felt suffocating as we gathered around the table. The social worker reviewed the evidence methodically, medical reports showing severe malnutrition, the contracts attempting to schedule shoots before Sophie's recovery, my documentation of abuse signs, the grandmother's long-term observations, the sister's testimony about family dynamics. Sophie's mother grew increasingly agitated as the evidence mounted. She fired her lawyer mid-meeting, claiming conspiracy. She accused everyone of coordinating against her, destroying her family's future. Her carefully constructed image crumbled with each outburst. The meeting extended into the evening. Hospital administrators joined, concerned about liability. The social worker made calls to supervisors, seeking guidance on this complex case. Through it all, Sophie remained upstairs, too weak to participate, but central to every discussion. A breakthrough came when the social worker discovered Sophie's mother had been falsifying medical documents. She'd been submitting fake health clearances to modeling agencies, claiming the girls were under doctor supervision. The forged signatures matched no licensed physician in the state. This revelation shifted everything. Criminal implications meant police involvement became mandatory. Two officers arrived to take statements, their presence making the situation undeniably real. Sophie's mother finally fell silent, perhaps recognizing the walls closing in. The grandmother seized the moment, proposing temporary guardianship. She lived in a small town 3 hours away, far from the modeling world. She promised to prioritize the girls' health above all else. The sister supported this plan, offering to help with the transition. Legal procedures moved slowly, but Sophie's condition demanded immediate decisions. The social worker approved emergency placement with the grandmother pending formal hearings. Sophie's mother protested, but her objections carried no weight against the evidence. I visited Sophie before the transfer, finding her awake and alert for the first time. She squeezed my hand, whispering her thanks. I assured her this was just the beginning of healing, that she'd have support throughout recovery. Her smile, though weak, showed genuine hope. The grandmother arranged medical transport for the journey to her home. I helped pack Sophie's few belongings from the hospital room, noting how her mother had brought designer clothes 2 sizes too small, still planning for future shoots. Sophie's sister was retrieved from the family home by social services. She appeared confused but relieved, clutching a stuffed animal as she joined her grandmother. The reunion between the sisters was touching, their shared ordeal creating an unbreakable bond. The drive to the grandmother's town took them away from every everything familiar. I followed separately, wanting to ensure their safe arrival. The modest house stood in stark contrast to their previous mansion, but it radiated warmth their expensive home never had. Settling the girls required patience. Sophie needed continued medical supervision, requiring daily nurse visits. Her sister struggled with regular meals, hiding food and checking her reflection constantly. The grandmother handled each challenge with steady determination. I stayed for several days, helping establish routines. We created meal plans that wouldn't overwhelm the girls' damaged systems. The local doctor, informed of their history, provided careful guidance on recovery protocols. Each small victory was celebrated quietly. The grandmother's neighbors proved invaluable. Word spread quickly in the small town, and support poured in. Home-cooked meals appeared on the doorstep. The local church organized volunteers for transportation to medical appointments. The community embraced the girls without judgment. Sophie's mother attempted contact repeatedly, but legal restrictions prevented direct communication. She sent letters through lawyers, alternating between threats and pleas. The grandmother burned them unopened, protecting her granddaughters from further manipulation. School enrollment became the next challenge. The local elementary school agreed to accommodate both girls' special needs. Sophie would start part-time, building stamina gradually. Her sister would receive extra support, helping her adjust to normal childhood activities. I returned to my own life but maintained regular contact. Weekly phone calls revealed slow but steady progress. Sophie gained weight ounce by precious ounce. Her sister learned to play without performing. The grandmother sent photos of small moments, shared meals, bedtime stories, normal childhood experiences. The legal proceedings continued in the background. Sophie's mother faced multiple charges, her modeling empire crumbling as investigations expanded. Other families came forward with similar stories. The industry faced scrutiny it had long avoided. 3 months later, I visited for Sophie's birthday. The transformation was remarkable. She'd gained enough weight to look like a healthy child rather than a skeleton. Her sister ran around the backyard, laughing freely. The grandmother watched from the porch, tears of joy in her eyes. The birthday party was small but perfect. Local children attended, treating Sophie like any other classmate. She blew out candles on a homemade cake, her wishes known only to her. The normalcy of it all felt like the greatest gift. Sophie pulled me aside during the party, showing me a journal she'd been keeping. Her entries documented not just recovery, but rediscovery of food, friendship, and childhood itself. She wrote about dreams beyond modeling, considering becoming a teacher like me. Her sister interrupted us, demanding attention for a drawing she'd made. It showed their family, grandmother, Sophie, herself, and me included in the corner. The figures held hands, smiling under a bright sun. No cameras or scales in sight. The grandmother shared her own struggles that evening. Financial strain from medical bills, challenges of raising traumatized children in her 70s. But she remained committed, selling belongings to cover costs rather than accepting any money connected to modeling. I helped establish a small fund through the school district, allowing anonymous donations for the girls' care. The response overwhelmed us all. Teachers, parents, and community members contributed what they could. The modeling money became irrelevant. Sophie started regular school that fall. She struggled initially, years of interrupted education showing, but her determination impressed everyone. She stayed after class for extra help, gradually catching up to grade level. Her sister thrived in kindergarten, discovering the joy of learning without performance pressure. Her teacher, aware of the history, provided extra emotional support. Watching her make friends and play normally felt like witnessing a miracle. The criminal trial approached, requiring Sophie's testimony. The prosecutor worked carefully to minimize trauma, allowing video testimony instead of court appearance. Sophie spoke clearly about her experiences, her voice stronger with each word. Her mother's conviction brought no celebration, only relief. The sentence removed any possibility of regaining custody. Other convictions followed as the investigation widened. The modeling agency closed permanently, its reputation destroyed. Winter arrived with new challenges, holiday traditions the girls had never experienced properly. The grandmother created simple celebrations, focused on togetherness rather than appearances. Sophie and her sister decorated cookies messily, joy replacing perfection. I received a card from Sophie that Christmas. Her handwriting had improved dramatically. She thanked me for noticing, for caring, for fighting when everyone else looked away. She included a photo, 2 healthy girls building a snowman with their grandmother. The recovery continued through spring. Sophie joined the school choir, finding her voice literally and figuratively. Her sister took up soccer, running for fun rather than calorie burning. Each activity marked another step toward normal childhood. By the 1-year anniversary of Sophie's hospital collapse, both girls had transformed. Not just physically, though their healthy weights showed recovery's progress. Their spirits had healed too, laughter coming easily now. The grandmother organized a small celebration, marking survival rather than dwelling on trauma. We gathered in her backyard, the sisters, their aunt, me, and supportive neighbors. No photographers, no scales, just people who'd fought for these children's lives. Sophie spoke briefly, thanking everyone who'd helped. Her words carried wisdom beyond her years, acknowledging the long road ahead while celebrating progress made. Her sister hugged her tightly, understanding more than any child should have to. As I prepared to leave that evening, Sophie handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter she'd written to her future students, promising to watch for signs others might miss. She'd decided to become a teacher, wanting to be for others what I'd been for her. The grandmother walked me to my car, expressing gratitude I didn't deserve. She'd done the hard work, providing daily love and stability. I'd simply refused to ignore obvious abuse, but she insisted that noticing mattered, that speaking up had saved her granddaughters. Driving home, I reflected on the journey. 2 little girls now had chances at normal lives. Not perfect lives, the scars would remain, but lives free from starvation, exploitation, and performance. Lives where food meant nourishment, not enemy. Where love wasn't conditional on appearance. My teaching continued with renewed purpose. Sophie's empty desk had long been filled, but her impact remained. Every child who entered my classroom received the attention they deserved. The breakfast club I'd started for her became a permanent program, feeding any hungry child. The ripple effects extended beyond our small circle. Other teachers began watching more carefully. Parents questioned the modeling industry's practices. Laws slowly changed, protecting child performers better. Sophie's bravery had sparked necessary changes, but in that modest house 3 hours away, none of that mattered as much as daily victories. Regular meals eaten without fear, homework completed without hunger interfering, bedtime stories ending with peaceful sleep, 2 sisters learning that childhood could be safe. The grandmother sent regular updates, photos of school plays, sports events, birthday parties, normal childhood milestones that had once seemed impossible. Each image showed girls growing healthier, happier, more confident in their worth beyond appearance. Sophie's journal entries, which she sometimes shared, revealed ongoing struggles. Bad days when eating felt impossible. Moments of panic over weight gain, but also triumph, choosing health over hunger, future over past. Her sister's recovery looked different, but equally powerful. 5 years later, Sophie graduated middle school as valedictorian. Her speech touched on resilience without detailing trauma. She thanked teachers who see beyond surfaces, communities that support struggling families, and grandmothers who step up when needed. Her sister, now 11, sat in the audience beaming with pride. No longer the skeletal 5-year-old from hospital photos, she'd become a confident child with interests ranging from art to athletics. The modeling world held no appeal for either girl. The grandmother, now in her late 70s, watched with tears streaming down her face. She'd given her golden years to raising traumatized granddaughters, never complaining about sacrifices made. Love had motivated every decision. Healing had rewarded every effort. I attended the graduation, proud beyond words. Sophie had not only survived but thrived. Her academic achievements impressed, but her emotional growth inspired more. She transformed trauma into purpose, planning a future helping others. After the ceremony, Sophie found me in the crowd. Now taller than me, healthy and strong, she hugged me tightly. She whispered that she'd been accepted to a teaching program, full scholarship based on merit and essay about overcoming adversity. Her sister interrupted, as always, demanding attention for her own achievements. She'd won an art contest, her piece about family featuring no models or cameras, just figures holding hands, supporting each other through storms toward sunshine. The grandmother invited me for dinner, a tradition we'd maintained throughout the years. Around her table sat 2 healthy teenagers, laughing over inside jokes, complaining about normal teenage problems. The contrast to that first hospital meeting felt surreal. Sophie asked my advice about teaching programs, her questions thoughtful and specific. She wanted to specialize in at-risk youth, recognizing signs others might miss. Her sister chimed in about becoming a pediatric nurse, helping sick children heal. As evening ended, I prepared to leave. Sophie walked me out, her sister trailing behind. They stood together, healthy and whole, futures bright with possibility. The grandmother watched from the doorway, mission accomplished through love and determination. Sophie handed me another letter, this one to be opened later. Her sister gave me a painting, a teacher surrounded by children, all reaching toward knowledge and care. Their gifts reflected gratitude but also understanding of education's power. Driving away, I glimpsed them in my rearview mirror. 2 sisters who'd survived starvation, exploitation, and abandonment. Now they stood tall, supported by grandmother's love and community care. The modeling world had lost 2 victims, but the world had gained 2 warriors. My classroom Monday morning felt different knowing Sophie's story had reached this point. Every child deserved someone who'd notice, who'd fight, who'd refuse to accept obvious abuse. Her empty desk had become a symbol, absence that sparked action. The Breakfast Club continued serving any hungry child. No questions asked, no judgment passed, just food and care when needed. Sophie's legacy lived in every meal shared, every child nourished, every sign noticed before too late. Her letter, opened that evening, contained simple words. Thank you for seeing me when I was disappearing. Now I'll help others be seen. Enclosed was a photo from graduation. 2 healthy sisters flanking their grandmother, all 3 beaming with earned joy. Thanks for exploring all these questions with me today. Until we meet again.